spent a long number of years working with traditional cultures in parts of the Western Pacific, particularly Vanuatu. I've learned more from them that is really of world importance than I did in all my 11 years at university in England. And now some of those years were at Oxford and Cambridge. Interesting cultures, interesting tribes. Not as open as certain Pacific cultures. What it is that all of these academic disciplines have been working on, or in, or with the Pacific for 100 years. But they haven't learned anything. They haven't learned anything. They've been using the Pacific as a sort of a territory that they can mine for their own academic purposes, that they can get their own benefits from. But actually learning anything from the Pacific, from the cultures there, they haven't learned anything. It hasn't changed their ways of thinking, it hasn't changed their ways of thought. And all of this attempt to ban kava in various forms, either in Australia or in Europe or in the US, is just a continuation of 19th century type missionary prohibition ideas or colonialization. Right, the indigenous people, they have to go to school, they have to wash regularly, they have to get jobs, they have to become Christian. I mean, the world has gone beyond that. You know, Pacific Islanders they have a right to continue their own cultures, their own way of life, their own way of thinking, in whatever way they want to do it today, and they have a right to be respected. The Pacific Island culture and their culture doesn't just exist for tourists to go to or for white people to do research projects in and get massive grants to do research projects in. Pacific Islands and Islanders and their cultures need to be respected. And kava is one of the things that is critical to many aspects of many of the cultures in parts of the Pacific. Kava is that most wondrous gift from the spiritual world of the Pacific to the world. It's a gift of the gods to the Pacific and a gift of the Pacific to the world, if only the world was sort of willing to listen up and accept it. It's a drink. The name refers to the plant, which is a relative of the pepper plant. Grows only in the Pacific. Its whole distribution across the Pacific is man-made. It doesn't have flowers or fruits or anything like that to propagate itself naturally. And the name also refers in English to the drink made from the roots of that plant.
So tell me about the roots. So what you drink is the roots, not the leaves
or any other part. The drink is made from the roots that can be either chewed or pounded or grated or chipped and then dried and powdered and then mixed with water and filtered, and then what you drink is the filtered liquid that comes out of those roots. The tradition of drinking kava is very ancient in many cultures across the Pacific, possibly more ancient in the Western Pacific than in the Eastern Pacific. The number of varieties of kava are greater in the Western Pacific, particularly in Vanuatu, that has the greatest number of varieties, about 85 different varieties of the plant, each with its own special set of chemical compounds and effects. And then east of that, you've got all the types of kava from Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, out into French Polynesia, Tahiti, Hawaii. New Zealand didn't have it for some reason or other, although they've got the word. They kept the word, which means bitter, but they didn't take it to, ancestral Polynesians didn't take it to New Zealand. But there's more varieties of the kava plant in Vanuatu than there are in the whole of the rest of the Pacific. And that's probably where it started.
Yeah, because that's what I've heard is that, when you're in Vanuatu, they've got every kind of strand and different kind of, like, quite strong tasting kava and things that give different types of side effects. Not side effects, but kava that gives you different effects.
There are special types of kava that will give you special types of effects. And so if you need a particular kind of kava to, for example, speak with the spirits of your ancestors, you try and find the particular type of kava variety that helps you to do that. If you need kava, I'm talking from the Vanuatu viewpoint, if you need a particular type of kava for medicinal purposes, then you look for the particular variety that's renowned for those medicinal effects that you need. If you need a kava to talk, to other people, there's a kava for that. If you need a kava to relax, there's a kava for that. If you need a kava where you don't want to talk and you want to get really stonkered and you don't want your legs to move or anything like that, well, there's lots of kavas for that.
Okay, so I'm aware of, because in Tonga the men drink kava. So we just call it kava tonga, which is what, the Tongan variety?
Yes, it would be. Although in Tonga you've got your own origin story
Yes.
of kava, which interestingly enough, at one level, links back to one of the really early versions of origin stories in one area of Vanuatu. But right up until I think the mid-15th century, big canoes from Tonga used to come out from Tonga to central Vanuatu to get kava from central Vanuatu. And
So
then
it's
there
been
was
traded for a long time.
Yeah, because the Tongans knew where the good stuff was. But a big volcanic eruption, I think in the mid-1400s, sort of blew the trade route apart, and that stopped.
Wow. How long have people been using it and where it came from exactly? Do you know? Do we know this
many
information?
centuries. People in the Pacific have been drinking it for many centuries. Most people outside the Pacific think, oh, it's a Polynesian drink from the Eastern Pacific, but it's not. That's where it was first reported from by Captain Cook. But its history is much more ancient in parts of the Western Pacific. And it's quite possible if you link back all the origin stories and you link back the root DNA, the genetics of the plant and stuff, you'll probably find that it all started really, all the Pacific kavas probably come from one area in northern Vanuatu, maybe a couple of thousand years ago. It's really hard to say. But it's been around a long time. It's become very much an integral part of very, very integral part of many Pacific cultures. Not all of them, but many Pacific cultures. And if you insult kava, if you denigrate kava, you're insulting and denigrating those cultures, because it's not just a drink. It's more than a drink. It's a communion with the spirits. It's a communion with your ancestors. It's a communion with those who are not born yet. It depends. It varies from culture to culture.
So we've known that it's existed, but who was it who first told the rest of the world outside of the oceanic region that kava existed?
You could probably say it's Captain Cook. French explorers drunk it in Tahiti before Captain Cook arrived, but then they weren't so French, hadn't been so good at PR as the British. Captain Cook was particularly good at PR, or the British Admiralty was very good at PR. 1769, Captain Cook and his crew drunk kava in Tahiti. They were very interested by it. They weren't impressed with the taste, but they rather liked the effect. And one of their scientists named the plant Piper inebrians, the inebriating making pepper. That name was later changed, Latin name was later changed to Piper methysticum, the dream-making or myth-making pepper. And it became very much through Captain Cook's journals, a thing that the English reading public got to know about from that date. And they all then assumed that it was a Polynesian thing. But of course, by then, Captain Cook hadn't been to the then New Hebrides or anything in the Western Pacific, and he hadn't got into kava in that western part of the Pacific. So it came through Captain Cook, and then there were probably earlier Spanish explorers who were drinking it, but their accounts have not come through to us so far. And then word of mouth, and the word of mouth spread across the Pacific really, really rapidly, long before the invention of the compass or any modern sailing techniques, because the whole distribution of kava across the Pacific is man-made. You take cut branches from cut near the base of the roots, near the top of the roots, and you bundle them together and you wrap them in special leaves that keep the moisture in, and you can travel for 10 days in a canoe with them. Then you stick the branches into the ground. There's no seeds, there's no flowers. The whole distribution across a third of the Earth's surface, nearly, is man-made. And this is long before anybody had even heard of white people.
Wow. So tell us the more recent history of kava.
Look, interestingly enough, the recent thing is, well, of course, as soon as missionaries started heading into the Pacific, they got stuck into kava, against kava, because they saw that it was very closely associated with the more spiritual levels of the cultures that they encountered that drunk it. In islands around Tahiti or in Hawaii, it was very close. Drinking was very closely associated with the traditional social structures and chieftainship systems, and was also used in rituals associated with ancestral spirits and other types of spirits. And so the missionaries began a campaign to make kava illegal because they said it was associated with heathenism. And they had a much harder time in Tonga because Tonga was never sort of a colony, and so the missionaries had to sort of keep a bit of a low profile in spite of the fact that they converted Tonga pretty early. But in the Western Pacific, for example, in Vanuatu, I mean, there's still areas that the missionaries haven't succeeded in parts of Vanuatu. Thank God, as one chief said. But anyway, there the missionaries were very much against kava drinking because they saw that it was very closely associated with the traditional religious structures, although they refused to believe that there were any religions in the New Hebrides or Vanuatu beforehand. It was really strange, and yet they were combating elements of the religious structures as they saw it. The colonial governments also, in many areas, tended to try and get rid of kava because they said it was unhygienic, but also because they said that, or they noticed that heavy kava drinkers tended to be not too respectful of colonial authority. Okay, from the 80s onwards, Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, and then later Vanuatu really got into kava exports overseas. And by the 90s, kava exports overseas had become a very important part of the economies of those nations. And there were representatives of sort of herbal companies from overseas that were coming into these nations, to tell the people to grow more, we'll buy it. And then when they started doing that, then they would come and they say, oh, you're charging too much, you better put your prices down or we'll go somewhere else, and things like that. But it really took off in a big way in the 90s in Europe, although particularly in Germany.
Was that as a drink, or was that when it was turned into little pills to make people sleep?
Yeah, it was turned into tablets and used as a medical thing to relieve anxiety, stress, and tension.
I remember seeing this for the first time on a chemist's shelf and seeing the word kava, and it was the very first time I'd ever seen that word in like a Western context. Yeah, it was quite a shock.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking back, that was the 90s.
In the 90s, and it really caught on in Germany. The Germans actually were the first sort of Western nation to actually really, really seriously, scientifically look into kava, and they were...
So they did research and studies?
From 1900, they were exporting kava from then German Samoa into Europe, and it was kava extract was used as a medicine to relieve minor illnesses of the urinogenitory tract, and also as a medicine for relaxation. But that side didn't really take off. It was the early medicine for the urinogenitory tract that took off.
I think it was before guarana came out.
Yes.
And people wanted to go the other way. They didn't want to relax. They wanted to...
Yeah. But it was, even in the States, it took off. It'd get your legal out of South Pacific High, man. And I said, yes, I remember seeing those adverts. But what happened?
How have governments reacted to?
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, by the late 1990s in Germany, they were selling kava tablets like crazy. It was amazing. But the tablets were being sold not by the big companies. It was by small herbal companies that just couldn't keep up with the demand. Germany, Austria, places like that. Incredible. And then suddenly, bam, I got a phone call from a colleague of mine in Switzerland who was published a book in Oxford on traditional medicines, and he said, hey, do you know the Germans are going to ban kava? And I said, what? And this was like end of the year 2000. He said, yeah, the German government is ramping up to ban kava. And I said, they've got to be crazy. What are they planning to ban it on for? Why? And he said, well, they say it damages the liver. And I said, what? Are you kidding? I mean, there's actually, interesting enough, in Vanuatu, there's one particular variety of kava that's actually used to cleanse the liver, you know. And there's no history of liver damage in the Pacific from kava. So I was shocked. So my wife and I went to Germany for 3 weeks. And I spent 3 weeks trying to find out why the Germans were trying to ban kava. What they were doing, it was very interesting. What they were doing was they were saying that they had a case of 1 death and a case of 5 liver transplants that were related to kava tablet intake. You know, and I said, well, this sounds really weird. What's going on? I spoke to the director of one small German herbal medicine company that had sold 100 million kava tablets during the decade of the 1990s, over a period of 10 years. They had no complaints whatsoever. I spoke to the director of another small German herbal medicine company that had sold 30 million kava tablets over the same period of time. And they had no complaints. And I said, well, why then are there these complaints coming out of the equivalent then of the German Ministry of Health? And one of them said, well, look, the sales of kava tablets are becoming so big that they're beginning to cut into the sales of the more expensive patented German medicines to relieve anxiety, stress, and tension. So what do you think?
Well, I'm just wondering, why wouldn't Big Pharma want its use widespread all over the place? Why do they not want that?
The French company L'Oréal tried to patent kava in the late 1980s, but they couldn't do it. It's a really complex thing. They really couldn't get their head around it. And none of the big pharmaceutical companies were actually selling kava tablets. They had left it. They'd ignored it. And it snuck on them like a sledgehammer. It suddenly hit them over the head because it was interfering with the sales of their really big, expensive, patented medicines to relieve anxiety, stress, and tension. And so, oh, surprise, surprise! So suddenly they find out that it is supposed to be bad for your liver or unhealthy. Anyway, I mean, okay, there might have been there was possibly a couple of cases where one European pill-making company, kava pill-making company, was using acetone in the extraction process, and that may have created a couple of problems there. But the problems, if there were any, were not associated with the kava, but they were associated with the manufacture of the tablets.
Oh, okay, in the process.
Yeah, in the process. But anyway, I found out that the death, it was classed as an exitus in Latin. The death was not related to kava. It was the death of it was supposed to be confidential, but it was easy to find out in Germany. It was the death of an 81-year-old woman that had been under medical treatment for the previous 15 years for severe alcohol and other substance abuse. And 6 months before she died, she took kava tablets. So they blamed the kava tablets on her death.
Okay.
You know, this is the typical sort of thing. So if you want to try and get something off the market, that's the way you do it.
Right.
I spoke to the German doctor who actually announced the upcoming ban on the TV, and he was standing on the TV screen in April 2000 with a kava plant on one side in a white medical jacket, and on the other side was big liver biopsy slides. And he was saying that there might be some connection. I actually spoke to him, and he said, oh, it's really interesting that you rung me. That's really good. I have no absolute evidence whatsoever that there's any connection between the kava and the liver damage. I just did what I was told. Anyway, I persuaded him to come down to Vanuatu and drink kava, you know.
So doing a bit of converting yourself. So just in a snapshot, as far as you know, where are you allowed to drink kava and where are you not allowed to drink kava at the moment?
Well, the thing is, the only country in the world now where kava is controversial, in inverted commas, is Australia. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Australia put through a type of ban on kava following the German ban, which came out in 2002 in Germany, which the High Court in Munster has now lifted in 2014. They said there was no reason for the ban. That hasn't yet been pushed through, but they've said that there was no real basis for the ban. In Australia in 2003, a couple of people started pushing a similar type of ban through the Australian legal system, and it came out as a law in 2007 or 2008 to ban kava in Australia. It's classed as a prescribed drug. You can only really drink it in Australia if you have a prescription from a doctor. So start queuing up to see your doctor, everybody. You can still bring in 2 kilos of powdered kava from the Pacific for local purposes or research purposes, they say.
Is that what you call it in your suitcase?
Yeah, but the thing is, Australia really does need to get its act together on this, because there is actually no reason for a ban, in spite of what Nigel Scullion says. It's by having a type of ban, which actually hasn't really been enforced too much in Australia, luckily so far, you're actually insulting many Pacific Islanders living in Australia and people of Pacific Island descent living in Australia, and you're insulting nations and cultures across the Pacific. The white man's world has been trying to do is take kava out of its ancient and profound cultural and social context and take it into the white man's world, where everything is done by different types of laws, which in the Pacific, people don't respect white man's laws, because most of them are just based on false stuff in a completely different series of worlds that are not necessarily relevant for Pacific cultures. The white man is trying to ban culture based on a series of concepts that are based on white man's law that ignore the realities of life in the Pacific. They're banning it for the wrong reasons, where if they really want to ban stuff for particular reasons, they should actually try and ban things that are harmful. The kava is not harmful. People complain about the fact that maybe in Australia, there's a problem with a certain percentage of Pacific Island youth who all seem to be in trouble. But if alcohol is the only thing they've got to relax with, then of course they're going to be violent. With kava, it's a pacifier. You cannot be violent. You cannot even think violently. If Pacific Islanders in the Pacific or wherever else they're living, if they're completely taken away from their cultures and their ways of respect, then who knows what's going to happen. If you ban kava, there is no reason on earth to ban kava. If you had no kava in the Pacific, certain areas of the Pacific that are kava drinking nations would become much more violent. If the only thing they had was access to white man's alcohol, those nations would become much, much more violent. Kava is a pacifier. It's the best natural remedy there is for real treating anxiety, stress, and tension, and relaxing. But the problem is, because the white man's world is only interested in their real God, which is money, they are trying to take kava out of its profound cultural context into a world where they can make money out of it. And by doing that, they're messing it up. And they're trying to fiddle around with it. And because a lot of these things are to do with money, what the white man's world wants to do is to find out what it is in kava that makes it work so well. It's more for relieving anxiety, stress, and tension. It's more effective than Prozac. I mean, there are Dutch medical studies that have proven that. But of course, big pharmaceutical companies overseas, they don't want something that is natural and in the outer islands is actually free to compete with something that white man's companies can make millions of dollars or billions of dollars out of. But the white man's world hasn't been able to actually yet find out exactly what it is in that very complex mixture of chemicals in kava that really makes it work. Because the things that the white men think make it work will, in the traditional way of looking at things, only work if they are in conjunction with other things. The mistake the white man's world always makes is they will try and take out the elements that they think makes it work and then mix it with some other things to make it work more effectively. By doing so, they mess it up. Because they don't understand the way real natural medicines work. They're into a quick fix. This is where the white man's world has made its mistake.